is Cheyenne, and I'm just a simple life explorer. I'm exploring life and what it brings to me. And for today's topic, we're going to be exploring masculinity and all the caveats that comes with it. So, the reason why I want to talk about this today is because, one, my experience with toxic masculinity. I feel like all throughout my childhood, I've definitely experienced that. Being on the back end of ignorance, dealing with people who felt offended because I showed up in a space as myself. That's also one of the things that comes with what we're going to talk about because it's a byproduct of something more complex, which I'm going to explain to you later. Secondly, I feel like this information would help those in the world who definitely experienced what I experienced but don't know what it is. And I feel like with this knowledge, it can help them understand what they went through. Lastly, I also want to talk about this because one of the things that come with masculinity is toxic masculinity in that sense. And it's a word I've definitely heard being tossed around all throughout my life. I never knew what it was. However, through extensive research and lots of fixation, I could definitely tell you that my research has paid off. To make this more comprehensive, we're going to start with the basics. We're going to start with social construction. Social construction. Social construction is a phenomenon where we as humans, we interact with more humans, and through this process, through this social process, we gain information to make sense of our world and to understand this reality. And through this process, how it happens is if society at large agrees that a concept is true, then this concept will result in it being true, which goes to show you that social constructs are not fixed. They can be bendable. One example of a social construct can be money, because we as humans agree that money is something valuable. We see it as something valuable. But if you really think about it, as a child, children don't really know the value of money until they grow older, until they've been conditioned to believe or taught to believe that money is something that's valuable. In the eyes of a child, money is just something they don't really know. It's just something that's there. However, as they go along through life, they do understand that with this thing, you get this being the object of their happiness. So that's the reason why this child, for instance, can believe money is something valuable. That's just one of the many examples of what social construct is. So to sum it all up, social construct is basically a collective agreement of what society says is true. And with this agreement is passed around and is passed around, which inevitably shapes our reality. And lastly, one thing to add with social construct. To make sense of all this, of course, cultural and historical context does come into play. Because as humans, we use existing evidence to shape or dictate our beliefs. Social construction of gender. It's a collective agreement or phenomenon where each gender is supposed to behave or act a certain way in order to fit the perception of what's being perceived. So, if you're a man, you act like this, you behave like this. If you're a woman, you act like this, and you behave as this. Basically trying to appease the perception of the social construct to fit in the binary to be perceived as man or woman. Which is also a mistake for many people because they believe there are only two genders. There are many genders out there, but my point is that in order to be perceived as such, we submit to an idea or a coding to a specific gender. In my own words, social construction and anything that relates to it is subjective. If we as a society agree on this subjective thing, then that becomes an expectation.
Traditional masculinity.
Now that there's some foundation laid, we can talk about masculinity. Traditional masculinity is, again, a social construction that relates to boys or men, in which expects them to be dominant, assertive, tough, and strong. There's no issue with these attributes or traits, but if pushed to the extreme, it can lead to a toxicness. And this toxicness is also called toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is basically traditional masculinity pushed to the extreme. It's a mindset, it's a belief, it's a tendency that perpetuates this toxic idea of how a man should be, who a man should be, and what a man should be. Pretty sure you've witnessed it in real time and in media. The most common one that I always hear is boys don't cry. or man up, or it could even be believing that boys don't wear pink. Toxic masculinity can manifest in parenting style. A parent scolding their son for being expressive, crying, or even believing a man should be heterosexual. There's so many ways it can manifest. It's not just one simple form. It manifests in so many forms. It's actually absurd. It could even be saying, men don't do self-care. Men only wear short hair. Men don't paint their nails. Men are supposed to be rugged. Men don't do fashion. You see the theme. If the object of masculinity is acting outside of what it is to be expected of a man, their manliness is then questioned. It's called toxic masculinity for a reason because it has a lot of social consequences. One of the things that come with this culture is promiscuity. Men of this culture are prideful in sleeping with as many people as possible, and that's also a form of toxicness. Because being dominant is a trait in traditional masculinity, this trait is taken to the extreme and it leads to a power-seeking behavior. And don't forget homophobia. Again, social consequence. And because so many expectations are placed on men regarding how they should be, who they should be, what they should be, it limits how expressive they can be in an overall aspect. So now they have a hard time expressing themselves in any way, shape, or form. Last but not least, one of the many things that come with toxic masculinity is anti-femininity. Anti-femininity is the rejection of feminine traits. And this translates into toxic masculinity as the aggression and hostility towards anything feminine. This behavior is especially a problem for women and queer men, or any men who do not align with this restrictive idea of what a man should be. Now that I've explained some of the examples and some of the facts, let's get started with the problem. The overall problem is traditional masculinity because it's not congruent with men and their authenticity. And if taken to the extreme, it leads to a toxicness that's not only detrimental to society, but men and their self-perception. Moving forward, the only way to aid this problem is to, one, define masculinity on your own terms. What does a man look like for you? And what are some positive examples that you see? 2, hold others accountable, if safe to do so. And 3, embracing boys and men as they are, in their entirety. Allow them to show all their colors. With that being said, in my closing, I just want to say this doesn't only apply to men, it also applies to women. Allow women to be as they are without holding them to expectations of how they should be, who they should be, and what they should be. In the future, I want us as humans to embrace every version of ourselves. Every version of you is what makes you, you. There's not only one way to be. There's so many ways to be, but why limit yourself to only one? Wrapping up, I just want to say thank you for choosing to be in my digital space, and I might see you again. But for now, till next time.